Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of what we used to call Bilateral View. And you're watching my podcast. I'm Arup K. Chatterjee, and here is my former co host and now guest and my colleague from the Philippines, Dr. Rhodora Magan. Dr. Magan, how has been your fortnight? How's everything back in the Philippines?
Excellent, Professor Chatterjee. Good evening to you.
A very good evening indeed. So we are hosting this simultaneously on my channel, Arup K. Chatterjee, and Bilateral View. So, Dr. Magan, where did we leave our conversation the last time?
The second installment, we were talking about this Saba dispute. We touched on it a bit.
Indeed, and I'm sure our listeners have tuned into your paper, your very innovative and potentially breakthrough research on the Saba dispute, but not in isolation. So it's not a paper on geopolitics, but it's a paper
Mhm.
on cultural transmissions and how no less than the Ramayan, authored by Sage Valmiki, reached the Philippines sometime in the, I'm assuming, late 18th century. Of course, it reached much earlier than that, but it manifested as, or it was codified as a kind of performance among the Maranao people of Philippines. And today we can see the large scale impact of that, of how the Ramayana has become an article of faith in
Mhm.
the cultural performance of what it means to be a Maranao. So the Maranao way of life includes the Ramayana as an integral performative text. It reflects in their lifestyle choices. It, more importantly, according to your hypothesis, reflects in the way the Maranao interpret their self-determination with respect to the rest of the Philippines, the rest of the Filipinos, and with respect to the Malay archipelago. Now, would you say that's a neat summarization of your findings, Dr. Mack?
Sorry, Professor Chatterjee. Can you repeat that?
So, would you say that's a neat summarization of your findings?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I think I would like to, here give a disclaimer that we are talking about very, highly complex geopolitical matters, and we are talking in a scholarly way. So it's
Mhm.
not as if we are in any way we intend to subvert the logic and the work of geopolitical experts, and surely not the external affairs ministries of various diplomacies of various democracies concerned.
Mhm.
We are not in any way trying to bypass the sovereignty of their logic. Our logic is scholarly. We are working towards an understanding when there is peacetime. So we are purely having a dialogue in a very very scholarly way, and
Mhm.
therefore, if anybody in our audience happens to view it from a very strict empiricist, cartographic, and geopolitical logic, then maybe our findings, our discussions, are not to be taken as incompatible with their work. Their work is a priori in a different context, and our work is more of a scholarly nature. So we are talking with a very long term view rather than
Yeah.
immediate political views. Is that? Do you think? Would you agree with that disclaimer, Dr. Magan?
Of course. Whatever I have gathered, for instance, in my study, is ultimately the truth based on what I've read, based on what I've studied, based on what came out essentially in those readings I had last year. So, yeah, it's a very scholarly work. So, yeah, there's a need to pay attention to those things. There are a lot of details there. So, whoever is not going to be in alignment with whatever we're saying tonight, well, they better read it. They better look into it as well. Because, again, I think we all have to go back to reading,
Mhm.
because right now we are bombarded with so many things via the social media, and it's like reading is now substituted by so many things. So we go back to reading once again.
Well, thank you. I also had in mind conflicts, flashpoints, and there's a way that very often academics get targeted or scapegoated
Yeah.
because our findings, our conversations generally are keeping in mind secular trends, meaning
Yeah.
long-term trends. We are doing long durée histories, and therefore our logic is keeping in mind 300, 400, sometimes even a millennia of historicist fact findings
Yeah.
that we have been able to articulate, whereas immediate conflicts have different resolution tendencies. So we don't want our work to seem incompatible with the geopolitical experts, because we are not talking here in the capacity of being geopolitical experts. So, Dr. Magan, without further ado, now to come back to your topic, there are some very interesting methodological issues here, and we are using some key concepts from the emerging discipline of island studies. Now,
Yeah.
island studies is a discipline that could be said to have been spearheaded by the likes of Godfrey Baldacchino, who I had the privilege of
Yes.
sharing space. I think a couple of weeks ago, he was in my podcast, so I urge viewers to please go back and listen to that. So Godfrey
That's a
Baldacchino.
wonderful conversation, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sure Professor Baldacchino would be very pleased. He's from Malta. He considers himself a political activist. I think of him as more of an astronaut
Hmm.
or a cosmologist. There is Adam Grydehøj from Britain. He's, I think, currently in China. There is Philip Hayward, again, a very influential theorist and
Of course.
an amazing scholar, founder of the journal Shima. There's also the journal called Island Studies, which was founded by Godfrey Baldacchino and then headed by Adam Grydehøj and others. There is Jonathan Boog, an
Yeah.
amazing scholar from Britain, phenomenal work. There is May Joseph, a great champion of performative elements in island studies. So each of these
Yeah.
scholars that I'm talking about, and there are several others, so I really apologize to people who might be feeling that their names are being left out. That's really not the intention. This is not a
Hmm.
name dropping list anyway, but I mention these scholars specifically because some of their concepts will be perhaps brought into play in our conversation today. So, Dr. Magan, what would you say was your experience of encountering the methodology of island studies?
When I arrived in India last year, I thought that I would be encountering a very critical subject. And indeed, it happened. Aquapelago happened. It was my first time to really encounter the term. And also, it was my first time to acknowledge that my country is
Mm,
indeed an aquapelago. And
mm,
as opposed to archipelago, aquapelago has so many characteristics.
mm,
So the very idea of island studies is so fascinating. It allows us to see islands like my country, which is an assemblage, um, in a different light. Okay. It allows us to see the Philippines, for instance, in a kind of positionality which is morphable, which
mm,
can be dissected multiple times because an aquapelago is very much reflective of so many things: the people, the aquatic spaces, the land, the livelihood, the stories, the traditions, and many other things. So, island studies creates this avenue for people like me to understand better who I am, the milieu, and where we're coming from, exactly a place where there is no fixed point.
mm,
It's a highly dense culture. Very recently, because of island studies, I had the decision to look into José Rizal, our national hero, and I sort of understood him uh, in the Aquapelagic sense, because he is also an islander as far as we're concerned. Okay, because to the world he's known as the Rizal who studied abroad, who is a highly European thinker, but no one thinks of him as an island boy. So
mm,
dissecting his psyche as an islander, of course, allows me to see his affinity for Southeast Asian cosmologies, which are so different from what we know about him as highly influenced by the European Enlightenment philosophy, because
mm,
that's the continentalist infusion in his mind. So yeah, that's the beauty of island studies. It awakens me to the reality that my country is rich and it's worth studying, Professor Chatterjee. And it's not just about being colonized. It's not just about, being poor, being corrupt, of course. That's always the case if you look at the Philippines, always making its way to these rankings as, one of the corrupt countries or one of the countries with a high rate of, let's just say, teenage pregnancy and many other stuff. Okay. On the other side, there are a lot more to look into. The beauty of the geography itself or the intersections of these many elements that make me as a Filipina.
So before I actually go on to explain the two key terms that you used, archipelagic and aquapelagic, aquapelago and archipelago. One of the key things that I found very interesting in my conversation the other day with Godfrey Baldacchino is the huge magnitude of positivity that he brings, and by positivity I mean a very active, dynamic, agential kind of positivity, wherein he talks about small islands as being capable of great political agency. Now, small islands, by virtue of their smallness, by virtue of the many other social, let's say, social disadvantages that they may undergo from time to time, apart unless you are Singapore or Manhattan. So unless you are those places, there are multiple kinds of social disadvantages linked with small islands. But you can very well bring all this into play through multiple tangential arenas. You can rhizomatically have diplomatic alliances. You can play geopolitics in a quantum like way. So these are some of the themes that Godfrey Baldacchino touches on in his 2 to 2.5 long decade of work. And he is a master of small islands. He is the Prospero of small islands in
Oh,
island study. And
okay.
and
I like that. I like
that's
that. The Prospero.
yeah.
Okay. So who is the Caliban?
And everybody else is a Caliban, and that's the
Yeah, I
beauty of
know.
island
Okay, yeah.
studies,
I
because
agree with you.
island studies is an incredibly democratic space, and it's unbelievably democratic. Anyway, I don't want to go into the internal dynamics of it. We are not card-carrying members of any studies for that matter. But to come back to the point now, archipelago and aquapelago. Archipelago is a well-known concept in geography, which is a cluster of islands, a cluster of let's say land assemblages contained in water. And archipelagic thinking, however, is slightly less Eurocentric, or a lot less Eurocentric. So, archipelago is a geographical concept. Archipelagic thinking is a new intellectual way of perceiving islands, however, structurally. So, it's still in the structural domain that islands ought to be perceived as as parts of a larger whole, and which shape that larger whole, and in turn get shaped by the whole, as it were, and vice versa. So it's a much more dynamic and agential way of seeing islands. So the Sulu Peninsula is not bereft of the Malay archipelago, and vice versa. And aquapelago, as you have rightly, very very rightly, very poetically, I should add, and very honestly explained your experience of aquapelago, definitionally means it's slightly more on the post-structuralist side, although I'm sure Phil Hayward, who coined the concept, highly influential concept, I'm sure Phil Hayward might disagree with the periodization, with the chronology, but post-structural, because it does not say that archipelagos don't exist, but it says that within the cognitive arena we also need to grasp the facility of land water assemblages as dynamic in shaping the cultures of people. So cultures are performances or manifestations of this geological, the natural proclivities of the place, as it were. So culture is also a manifestation of culture and trade and economics and multiple other things. So they are shaped by the geology and land water assemblages. So there's a non-duality. There's a kind of an inseparability of what was otherwise initially privileged as land spaces and water was aberration. but today it is a a richer cognitive arena. So I'm done with the boring stuff, Dr. Magan, the definitions. And just to mention, Jonathan Pogue and Godfrey Baldacchino, again, there are nuances in their ways of thinking, but they would more be towards the side of archipelagic thinking, which is also non-Eurocentric, by the way, but structural. And Phil Hayward is slightly more post-structural because he is of the aquapelagic ways of thinking. There is Adam Grydehøj, who focuses a lot on geopolitics. There is May Joseph, who focuses a lot on performativity and necropolitics, of how histories of places, exactly your domain now. So I'm giving the cue back to you now, exactly the domain where certain histories get neglected over a period of time, and they are not performed back into life, or islanders then want to assert their agency and try to find out ways of how to bring them back into their daily performance. So that is the performative aspect of what A. Joseph might call aquatopia, or hydropoiesis, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So these are lyrical terms that she deploys to capture the performativity of island space. Now,
that's a beautiful term. Hydro something.
Hydropoiesis. I don't know if I just made it up instantly, but surely aquatopia is attributable to May Joseph.
I thought, Professor Chatterjee, when you mentioned hydropoiesis, this is very much what Donna Haraway said in Symphosis, meaning making, or making with, as opposed to autopoiesis, which is individual making. So this is like the book that we read a couple of days ago, Staying with Trouble, right? Okay, just amplifying on interconnectedness.
Yeah, exactly. And Donna Haraway is one of the key, let's say, references in island studies. Of course, modern-day geographers or historians of geography find Donna Haraway, Doreen Massey, another key anthropologist, as critical references in their work. So island studies very often talks about Donna Haraway as well.
Yeah.
To come back to the question of agency and Philippines. Now, where do you think your work takes us? Do you think it can help people look at Philippines differently, and in what capacity? Because I know that you try to be self-critical, but there are amazing things about Philippines, not just aesthetically, but even in terms of its political agency. There are amazing things that we can draw out from your paper. Would you like to walk us through that?
Okay, the way you phrased the question is killing me, because you essentially wanted me to tell the viewers tonight that my country is like the North Star. When you said that my paper essentially is going to take these people to this direction, I feel having this huge responsibility on my shoulders. But yeah, of course, why not? I should feel that. I should feel that way because I wrote the paper. And there's intentionality there, for writing the paper. Well, it's very clear from the get-go what I wanted here. You're right. Philippines is just so hybrid a culture. And it's very colorful. There's a melange of people, melange of cultures. So that when you see the country, you see so many things. Okay? But despite the variety, we are seeing fixed points. One of the fixed points is the very condition of the country, politically speaking. So in the second installment, we had the Sabah dispute. And towards the end of my study, I really touched on that, okay, in relation to the morphing of the Ramayan to suit the local flavor. So there's a reason why the Maranao essentially did it, because they want to articulate this kind of image seen in the character of Maharaja Lawana, who is very bold, heroic, okay, somebody who cannot be trifled with, somebody who can never ever be emasculated. So that's the kind of element that I want people to see among Filipinos, and that this is very collective behavior. That's the positive direction that we're seeing here. And also another positive direction would be allowing the country to be seen in light of its struggle for, not really for unification, but for for a deeper understanding of what it is as a collective. That, there's no point here to say that Philippines should be seen eventually as a country where Muslims and Christians are finally entwined. That's just too impossible. It's more of saying that, towards the end, we're more likely to see a country where, despite the variety of people, the government can, in a way, find a solution to making things work by not taking the lives of these young people, of these children who are soon to be manning the country, who are soon to be leading the country. So it's like a very peaceful negotiation. And that's not about, basically, based on the Sabah dispute that we touched on, the other direction would be, well, giving the country a sense of what? Pride in knowing exactly that there is no point of reclaiming Sabah, for instance, because, it will just add to the country's malady. If we think that corruption is a form of malady, if we think that ongoing struggle concerning lands, etc., would contribute to the country's ailing health. So it's about relinquishing the idea of gaining these territories that have already been settled. Okay. Well, we touched on the French court again. In the study, there was a mention there of, how the French court gave it to Malaysia. And so now, for instance, moving forward, the study suggests that, there are other things to look into, and that this dispute between the Philippines and Malaysia, for instance, that was settled at the French court, it could no longer be resurrected. I mean, reclaiming it would be resurrecting it, right? So resurrecting it would be of no use, because essentially the people, the Muslims, for instance, the Mohammedan people, are settled with the idea that, our kin can't just be found in the Philippines, but in many points in Southeast Asia. So that alone suggests a very clear pathway ahead. And so the young people, for instance, if they read the work, they could better grasp what this tension is about. That at the end of the day, this could just become an artificial tension if we keep on barking up the wrong tree. So that, if we are becoming more sensible with it, we neglect the idea of creating a skirmish that will just delay progress in the country. So I think it's high time, Professor Chatterjee, that, Philippines should act like a man and should be able to move, without thinking about these things in the past, okay? And instead of looking at these territories that have already been settled, like I said earlier, the country itself could think of alternatives, okay? Because there are many more things to look into, because again, this is an aquapelago. This is not just composed of a unilateral entity, but multilateral entities. Everything is multilateral. So that means a multi-vectored paradigm could be devised by the country. And it could be acted upon by people, not just by the Christians, not just by the Muslims, but all the rest inhabiting this assemblage, which is very rich. I don't know if I'm hitting the point here, but I thought that's the kind of direction I'm seeing in the study that I'm doing.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I think it's a question of self-determination. So when I say we, I mean I'm not calling myself an other here, but I just mean to say that the lived experiences of people in the Philippines have to be given priority, and
Yes.
their truth needs to be articulated in the idiom that suits the reality the best. So I don't have access to the idiom and the empirical nuances or idiosyncrasies of the situation. So it's one thing to read something from the outside and not be aware of the politics of knowledge production. So as Bruno Latour says, I mean, he talks about double-click knowledge production that we constant, and today it's ChatGPT, that we constantly are processing information and producing knowledge, or creating the simulation of knowledge, but we are not conscious of the exact means of that capital, the means of knowledge production. So the means, I think, you are far closer to the means. So I'm nobody to intervene and interrupt. But I'm very glad that it has given you a lot of agency, and by which I again don't mean you in your national identity, but in the intellectual sphere of ideas. The Filipino representation could be put forth in the idiom of island studies. I think it's a wonderful achievement for the discipline, and there's an osmosis. So the discipline is giving you a lot of things,
Yeah.
and you are also contributing to the discipline. So that's really wonderful. Now, any closing thoughts? Any
Yeah.
closing thoughts that you would like to share about your newfound joy in island studies?
I would like to thank you for introducing the idea to me because, had I not known this, I would not have thought of so many things to study about my country. You see, the best thing any professor could do in the classroom is to encourage the students to think about his or her country in light of the many things that we have, the many resources we have. And we have the water, okay, which is so dominant in this country. So I thought that it's high time to reassess what we have, not look into what we don't have, because essentially that can make things more depressing. So if we encourage people, especially in the classroom, to think like this, they too could become a researcher. And I had this feedback from a student just this week, and she said that she's very fascinated by the idea that there are so many things we can study in the country through the lens of Aquapelago. I'm so happy to hear that. And moving forward, even myself, like you and I always talk about this, that, it's so interesting all the time to talk about Aquapelago because it's never ending. Like every single day, there's a new meaning to it. And there are new things you can attach to it. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. It is indeed a very deeply enriching. I'm just feeling a little concerned, or rather euphoric,
Why?
depending upon the lenses that you take. Euphoric or concerned, not concerned as much as much as euphoric for the coiners of the concept. So we have to check. We have to check with Phil if he would approve of all the interpretations of Aquapelago people are taking. But I'm sure the kind of person these people are, they are incredibly democratic people, and they wouldn't really mind. But we also have a commitment as scholars to
Yeah.
let the mind play, but play within certain committed limits. So there's got to be integrity in the intellectual process. Dr. Magan, I am afraid we have to end this
Too
remarkably
bad. I have a lot of things to
beautiful.
say on
I,
this
I,
topic,
I
but anyway.
I know, but why don't we spill it over into a fourth episode, a
Of
fourth
course, of
installment
course.
about the
Why not?
Ramayan, the Philippines, Aquapelago, and maybe we'll dedicate that entirely to your understanding of aquapelagicity through the Filipino lens. So, what do you
And
say
let's
about
not forget, Professor Chatterjee, if ever there's a fourth installment, we will include, the many things that I have done with the term in the articles I submitted to Gastromythology, because it seems like I'm so into it already that, in terms of
that?
rise,
Sure.
there's aquapelagicity there. And, the betel knots, again, we incorporated
Yes, we will
aquapelagicity
talk
there.
about
So,
that. Well,
yes.
I can't wait for that. And thank you, dear audience, for joining this wonderful conversation that I've had with Dr. Magan. And I hope you also liked it. And please stay tuned. Dr. Magan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure always having you over. And I can't wait to have you over for the next episode. Thank
A
you.
million thanks, Professor Chatterjee, and to the viewers tonight. Thank you very much. Maayong gabi, daghan kaayong salamat.
See you.
See you.